The morning the billionaire family lost $10 billion, the man they had spent months calling, just the driver, was the only person in the city who could save them. He stood outside their glass and marble headquarters in a plain black suit, one hand holding a worn leather folder and the other holding the tiny lunchbox his 8-year-old daughter had forgotten in his car. Behind him, luxury cars arrived one after another, reporters crowded the sidewalk, and security guards whispered about the financial disaster unfolding upstairs. But nobody noticed the quiet man standing near the curb. Nobody remembered that before the headlines, before the panic, before the billion-dollar losses, he had once been the person who opened their car doors every morning with a smile. His name was Kellan Mercer, a single father who had learned the hardest lesson in life: people often measure your worth by the uniform you wear instead of the heart beating beneath it. If you believe kindness matters, that people deserve second chances, and that someone's job should never determine their value, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the very person life has chosen to put at the center of the story. Kellan had not always been a driver. Years earlier, he had worked in financial technology, building security systems for major investment firms. He was brilliant with numbers, patient with machines, and especially gifted at seeing patterns other people missed. But after his wife passed away unexpectedly, everything changed. Their daughter, Juniper, was barely 4 years old, and Kellan could not imagine leaving her with strangers while he worked 80-hour weeks in an office. So he walked away from his career, sold almost everything they owned, and took a driving job with the Veyron family, one of the wealthiest families in the country. The pay was good enough to keep Juniper safe, fed, and comfortable. More importantly, the schedule allowed Kellan to take her to school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. He considered it a sacrifice. The Veyrons considered it proof that he was beneath them. The family patriarch, Alaric Veyron, owned Veyron Global, an enormous financial and technology empire whose value seemed almost impossible to understand. His daughter, Serafina, ran the family foundation, while his son, Dorian, was being prepared to take control of the company. Their lives were surrounded by private jets, chauffeurs, bodyguards, penthouses, and people who said yes before they even finished speaking. Kellan was simply the man who drove them from one place to another. At least, that was what they believed. Every morning, Kellan arrived before sunrise. He polished the black sedan until it reflected the golden morning light, checked the tires, inspected the brakes, and made sure the back seat had everything the family might need. He knew which roads became crowded after 8, which intersections were dangerous during school hours, and which streets flooded after heavy rain. He knew that Alaric liked the temperature inside the car slightly warmer than normal. He knew Serafina hated sudden braking. He knew Dorian liked to take phone calls without anyone speaking. Kellan remembered everything because that was what he did. He paid attention. One bright Tuesday morning, however, Kellan overheard something that changed the way he looked at the family forever. Serafina was standing near the entrance of their mansion, laughing with a visiting investor. She glanced toward Kellan and casually said that people like him should be grateful to have the opportunity to stand near successful people. Dorian laughed and added that Kellan was lucky because driving a luxury car was probably the closest he would ever come to owning one. Kellan heard every word. He simply lowered his eyes, opened the car door, and said nothing. That afternoon, Juniper climbed into the back seat after school carrying a paper sun she had made in class. She proudly told her father that the teacher had asked the children to draw someone who made them feel safe. Kellan smiled and asked who she had drawn. Juniper held up the paper. It was a picture of a little girl holding the hand of a tall man beside a bright yellow sun. Underneath, in crooked letters, she had written, "My dad." Kellan felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent years wondering whether giving up his old career had made him less of a man. His daughter reminded him that providing love, stability, and safety was not failure. It was success of a different kind. A few weeks later, the Veyron family made a decision that would eventually cost them everything. Veyron Global was preparing to purchase a rapidly growing technology company for nearly $10 billion. The deal looked perfect on paper. Dorian was convinced it would make him the youngest executive to complete the largest acquisition in the company's history. Financial analysts praised the move. Newspapers called it visionary. Investors celebrated. But Kellan noticed something strange. One afternoon, while waiting outside a conference room, he saw a document left open on a tablet inside the car. He did not touch it at first. Then he noticed a familiar pattern in the numbers. The company being purchased was reporting revenue that did not match its transaction records. Several accounts were moving money through shell companies, and the same irregular pattern appeared in a series of overseas investments. Kellan immediately recognized it. Years earlier, he had helped design software that detected exactly this kind of financial manipulation. His heart began pounding. He knew what he was seeing. The company was not worth $10 billion. Someone had artificially inflated its value, and if Veyron Global completed the purchase, the family could lose nearly everything. Kellan tried to warn Dorian. The response was humiliating. Dorian laughed, told him to stay in his lane, and reminded him that he was hired to drive, not analyze billion-dollar transactions. Serafina was even colder. She told Kellan that curiosity was not intelligence and that he should focus on keeping the car clean. Kellan walked away with his dignity wounded, but his conscience would not let him remain silent. That night, after Juniper fell asleep, Kellan sat at their small kitchen table under a single warm lamp. He opened his old laptop, the same battered machine he had carried from his previous career, and began working. He did not hack into anything. He did not steal information. He simply used publicly available financial records and his own knowledge to verify what he had seen. Hours passed. Midnight became 2 in the morning. Then 3. By dawn, Kellan had built a detailed report showing that the acquisition target had billions of dollars in hidden liabilities. He printed everything, placed the pages into a leather folder, and went to work. The next morning, he gave the folder to Alaric. For the first time, the old billionaire actually listened. Kellan explained everything calmly. He showed the transaction patterns, the suspicious transfers, and the companies connected to them. Alaric's expression slowly changed from irritation to disbelief. Before he could respond, Dorian entered the room and saw the folder. He became furious. He accused Kellan of spying on the family and interfering in matters beyond his position. Serafina supported her brother, insisting that the driver had become confused about his place. Alaric hesitated. And that hesitation was the moment the Veyron family lost their chance to avoid disaster. The acquisition went through. 3 days later, the hidden fraud became public. The company's true liabilities exploded across financial networks. Investors panicked. Veyron Global's stock collapsed. Banks demanded emergency payments. Lawsuits appeared from every direction. In less than 48 hours, the family had lost nearly $10 billion in market value. News helicopters hovered above their headquarters. Reporters shouted questions through the gates. Employees stood outside crying, terrified about their jobs. Inside the boardroom, Alaric stared at the same leather folder Kellan had given him days earlier. Every warning had been correct. The men they had mocked had seen the disaster coming. Kellan was called into the boardroom one final time. He entered quietly, expecting to be fired. Instead, he found Alaric sitting alone, looking 20 years older. The billionaire placed his hands on the table and admitted that Kellan had been right. He admitted that arrogance had made him ignore the one person who had cared enough to warn him without asking for anything in return. But Kellan did not celebrate. He simply said that $10 billion could be rebuilt, but trust was harder to recover. Then he placed another document on the table. It was a proposal for a financial security system based on the software concepts he had developed years earlier. Kellan had spent the previous night refining it. If Veyron Global wanted to survive, he could help them rebuild their risk management division and prevent another disaster. Alaric stared at the pages, then asked why Kellan would help the family after the way they had treated him. Kellan looked toward the window, where the morning sun was spilling across the city. He thought of Juniper sitting at her school desk, probably drawing another picture for him. He thought about his late wife, who had once told him that being good was not about receiving kindness from others. It was about choosing kindness even when others had failed you. Kellan said that he was not helping because they deserved it. He was helping because he wanted to leave the world a little better than he found it. That answer broke something inside Alaric. For the first time in decades, the billionaire cried. Within months, Kellan became the architect of Veyron Global's financial recovery. He refused a lavish office at first and instead asked the company to create scholarships for single parents who wanted to return to school. He asked for better wages for employees at the bottom of the company. He also asked Alaric to fund a technology program for children who had lost a parent, because Kellan knew what it meant to grow up with fear and uncertainty. Dorian eventually apologized. Serafina did too. Neither apology erased what they had done, but Kellan accepted them because he understood that forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant refusing to allow someone else's cruelty to control the rest of your life. Months later, Kellan drove into the Veyron headquarters one final time. This time, he was not wearing the driver's uniform. He stepped out of the same black sedan wearing a simple navy suit. Juniper stood beside him, holding his hand. The company had invited them to a ceremony celebrating the recovery of Veyron Global and the launch of the Mercer Foundation for Working Parents. The same entrance where Kellan had once been ignored was now filled with employees applauding him. Alaric walked forward and handed Kellan a small framed photograph. It showed the original company headquarters decades earlier, when Alaric had been a young man with almost nothing. He told Kellan that wealth had taught him how to buy almost anything, but losing $10 billion had taught him the value of listening. Kellan looked at Juniper, who was smiling proudly. For years, people had seen him as a driver. His daughter had always seen him as something else. A father. A protector. A man who kept going. And sometimes, that is the greatest title a person can ever have. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope on a difficult day. Before you leave, comment the words, "Kindness always wins," if you believe a person's worth should never be measured by their job, their clothes, or the amount of money in their bank account. Because Kellan's greatest victory was never the billions he saved. It was proving that dignity does not come from wealth, power, or status. It comes from what you choose to do when nobody is watching. He had every reason to become bitter, but he chose to remain kind. He had been underestimated, humiliated, and dismissed, yet he never allowed their judgment to define him. And when the world finally gave him the chance to prove who he was, he did not use his success to destroy the people who had once looked down on him. He used it to lift others up. The sun was setting over the city when Kellan and Juniper walked toward their car. The golden light touched the windows of the towering Veyron building, turning the glass into a sea of fire. Juniper squeezed her father's hand and looked up at him with the same innocent pride she had shown in that little paper drawing years before. Kellan smiled. He no longer needed anyone to call him important. He already knew who he was.